Paul Schreiner, and this is Canon. Today we're going to look at an arm lock from side control and a variation of a spiral arm lock from side control as well. Once we've passed our opponent's guard, we're able to hold them down, keeping top position and not let the legs re-enter. We're working to get their arms away from their body. Our opponent will have frames on both sides, so he's inside my knee with this elbow, and he's on my shoulder inside my chin with this one. Most of his escapes will be based on the positioning of this arm, or will be facilitated by the positioning of this arm. This frame can assist him as well and can be problematic, but it's not the worst thing in the world to have this frame in, because it can give us some leverage, assuming we're under the elbow, to get his arm away from his body. So even though he has this frame, we're going to try to keep this frame killed. We're going to try to keep his wrist connected to his chest. So when we have this head and underhook control, I'm underneath the elbow. I'm going to use my chin and head position to keep his wrist down. Now, I'm going to ensure his shoulder doesn't move and roll my weight forward. Now I can free my hand and pass the arm over my head, okay? It really doesn't matter how you get to this position. We're just trying to get past the frames. On the other side, we can look to staple our opponent's arm with either leg. Okay. But we can also wait and do that after we've pulled him on his side. So it's not necessary for the arm lock that we have the near side arm stapled before we initiate the position, as we'll see. So once we have the arm isolated, I'm going to bring my opponent onto his side by shifting my weight back. Okay. And I like to step my leg up to give me a bit of height as we're moving. You can also keep two knees down and sink your body more. It's very important though that we weight our forearm. That's what's helping our position. It's giving us a frame in case we need to drive our opponent flat again. Okay. Both hands are going to stay on the arm. If I haven't kind of controlled the near side arm yet, we can find that now. So there's, again, you want to get that arm stapled. There's a number of ways to do that. We can pummel one knee inside. We can kind of pop to a little knee on belly position, try to scrape that off. Sometimes we can use our hand. Sometimes our opponent will block down by our knee, and we can even just kind of track past the foot in front. Again, it doesn't really matter how we get there. We're going to look to staple that arm. Okay. Now we're going to switch the staple and start to step up. So you can see I'm getting closer to a kind of aligning myself with my opponent, and that's to facilitate pulling that arm up and throwing this leg through. So our weight's going to shift away right from the part of our body that we're trying to move. So my weight shifts away. I can throw that leg through, and I'm going to fall, maintaining control of that arm with both hands. So notice I'm not posting, which will tend to create a bit of space. I'm landed on my hip and shoulder, so I'm facing my opponent's legs. My legs are heavy. You can see if Cannon wants to connect his hands, he has to go around my shin. So it's going to be a pretty weak connection and easy to break. Okay? Of course, if we have the option, we're going to try to not let him connect his hands in the first place. Now our first finish from here, I'm bringing his wrist to my shoulder. The initial control we had on that elbow with our underhook is going to maintain, and I'm going to tighten that to my body. Now all I'm going to do is start to rotate back to a traditional arm lock position, and that rotation, right, is driving this fulcrum through his elbow, okay, as we're putting his arm into hyperextension. So there's our first finish. If there's a little wiggle room, or we didn't have a good bite on that, right, maybe we'll rotate all the way back to a traditional arm lock position to finish. One more time, we're going to isolate that far arm. Okay. Pull my opponent on the side. We'll take that near side arm off. Keep it stapled to the ground. Turn the corner a bit as needed. Keep ourselves super connected to this arm, create a bit of space so we can knife our foot through, following to our side. Again, now you'll see if Cannon wants to try to connect his hands, it's difficult. And if he does get his hands connected, it's not going to be a strong connection. We should be able to break that. We're going to pull his wrist and hand to our shoulder, connecting to his arm. And get an extra strong bite, okay, above his elbow. And now we're going to start to rotate ourselves back again. That will provide us with a finish. If there was a little wiggle room there, we can get right back to our traditional arm lock position and start to finish there as well. So that's how I've typically taught the arm lock. I learned this from Marcelo. You can see Marcelo teach this on MG in Action and his instructionals as well. And you can see it on my arm lock and spiral arm lock instructional. I'm a big fan of passing the leg first when we do, before we sit down, basically as we turn the corner. It kind of cuts the corner and gets our hips better connected to our opponent's shoulder. So one more time. So now we're going to do a spiral arm lock from side control. And the spiral arm lock is still a hyperextension of the arm where we're attacking the elbow, but we're applying it with internal rotation. So that internal rotation kind of locks the shoulder into position. It helps immobilize our opponent, and the finishing mechanics are slightly different. So we're going to look at maybe why we would go to a spiral arm lock in this position and how to get there. So sometimes we'll get in this arm lock situation where we're having trouble managing this arm. And this arm can intervene and stop us in a number of ways. He can block us from stepping over the head. He can take this ankle and put it between his legs, so now I can't step over his head without damaging my knee or without putting a torque on my knee here. He might just frame the top of his head. So if I step in for one of these arm locks now, he can disconnect my head controlling leg. So when we feel any of these things start to happen, not so worried about him stopping me from stepping over, because that's an easy enough thing to back this hand out of the way. Set. But now this this arm of my opponent might be looking to push my ankle between his legs, or it might be looking to frame. Okay, so what we're going to do is, instead of throwing our leg all the way over in one motion, now we're going to step up and pivot. But as we pivot, our leg is going to trace to the inside of his foot. Okay. From here, my opponent will be able to connect his hands. We're not going to really be in a situation to keep the hands disconnected very well, but we can quite easily pass our other leg over, so we have a decent arm lock control here. But now, instead of focusing on breaking the grip here or going to a reverse or a side triangle position, right, there are some ways we can look to break this grip. Instead, we're going to look to try to break this grip and attack the arm lock with our hips rather than kind of with the assist of our upper body. So I'm going to look to try to pass his arms over my knee and start to put his arm into my hip here. So notice like both arms are over, and now we can guide ourselves back out to a position like this. So I have two arms controlling my opponent here, and we're pinning in this position. I'll just rotate a bit. By keeping our opponent's shoulder down, so it makes it difficult for him to roll away, difficult if not impossible. Assuming he does roll, he's rolling again right back into a omoplata arm lock secondary back take. Okay, so not the end of the world, but we're going to try to avoid that if possible. Okay, we're trying to keep his elbow controlled and off the floor so he can't turn into us. So there's a huge difference, okay, both gi and no gi, with having one hand on this tricep or two. We are always wanting to try to keep two hands on this tricep. And now we're playing with our weight, with the distance between our legs to try to keep this pin. Okay? If your leg is long enough, relative to the length of your opponent's torso here, you can also use this near side hook as a way to prevent their hip from turning over, because that's how he can harness a lot of weight and momentum to try to yank this elbow free. So if I feel like Hannah's trying to whip over here, I can use this hook to mitigate that. Now, the trick is, how do we get on top here without posting our hand. Okay? We're gonna try to keep this lock as strong as possible, and we're gonna get out of our own way and look to chop. Okay? So once I chop, I'm essentially starting to pass the control from my hands off to my leg, but it's still not really sufficient because this is unweighted here. So we're gonna once we find we have a good chop, we're gonna swing this leg behind our body and look to roll forward until our knee touches the floor. Okay. Now we can start to post our hand and start to put weight on our opponent. And we're essentially pinning just as we were before. Okay. Now our upper body is able to kind of start controlling the arm more. We still are reinforcing with our arm. So if Cannon tries to roll away, I can kind of countersink my weight to stop him from rolling away. And if he tries to spin towards me, we have a good bite on the elbow. At this point, we're just looking to step behind his head and start to, in a controlled way, roll our hip to the floor. So this is the position that we get to in a spiral arm lock. So you see there's a lot of internal rotation on his arm, and I can feel that his thumb is pointed down, and that's super important for this to work. So I have my opponent's thumb pointed down. He's being held down by this leg that's cutting across his body, and this secondary leg is going to roll up. It's kind of helping that internal rotation until my thigh is positioned just at the elbow line. Now we're bringing the knee towards his feet. We're sitting up and rolling our body towards the head here. So my torso is rotating towards the legs, my weight is leaning towards the head, and I'm sitting up. If we're missing one of those three ingredients, we're not gonna have the leverage to finish here. If I go back, I'm gonna lose it. If I rotate towards the head as I put the weight, I'm not gonna get a finish, okay? And if I twist but don't put weight towards his head, I won't get a finish. So again, all together, we're controlling our opponent here. We're bringing knees towards the legs, but most importantly, my torso is turning towards the legs. My weight is moving towards my opponent's head and getting the tap. If our control is insufficient on the arm to maintain the rotation, and I feel his thumb slip up, we're going to capture the wrist with both hands, bringing it across our body. The second leg can come and reinforce, and we get a more traditional finish on the arm here. So, one more time, looking at this spiral arm lock position. Okay, I'm pulling him up. I feel unable to manage that arm, so I'm just going to go forward in the movement and slide to the inside of that frame. Okay, now my second leg will come over. I'm controlling my opponent at his hips and shoulders in this position, so feet and knees are splayed out, and I'm going to look to start bringing that arm to my hip, and the feet can work to guide us into this pinning situation here. So if he tries to roll away, he can't. If he tries to roll towards me, he can. Now, when we're ready, get out of our way. We get a good chop. Swing this leg behind our body. Focus on bringing our knee to the floor. Now, post a hand and start to put our weight over our opponent. If possible, we keep our knee on this side of our opponent's head and just bring the foot over on his chin. It's going to make it impossible for him to come up. But if we can't find the space and we take a wider step and his arm comes in and starts to frame this leg away, it's not the end of the world because we can find that second arm to target for a very powerful arm. Otherwise, once this foot is in position, we're now just going to slide our hip off of our opponent. So we're sitting right next to him here. We're sitting up. We're going to drag this leg in. Okay, it's continuing to roll his arm and get the spiral arm lock finish. If we feel the thumb come up,